Have you ever really thought about the words in a book like the Bible? I don't just mean what they mean, but where do they actually come from? Well, today we're going to take an incredible 1,500-year journey to find out. We're going to compare two very different Bibles, one you might have on your shelf and one of its oldest, most ancient ancestors. And you're about to see how just a couple of words can change, well, everything. Our story kicks off with something pretty familiar. This right here is a beautiful 19th century family Bible. You can just feel the history, right? It's heavy, it's ornate, it just feels important. For so many families, a book just like this was the absolute heart of the home. It was where they recorded births and deaths, and it was their guide for life. But that gets you thinking, doesn't it? The words printed so neatly on these pages, in English, have traveled through centuries, across languages and entire empires just to get here. So how in the world did they make that journey? To figure that out, we've got to trace them all the way back to the source. So first, let's take a closer look at the book we started with, this really impressive family Bible from the 1870s. What was it actually built to do? See, this wasn't just a book of scripture. It was more like a complete study package. The text is printed, obviously, and it's in English, but look at all the extras you get. There are huge commentaries from theologians, detailed illustrations to make the stories pop, and super helpful indexes so you can find any topic you can think of. The whole thing is designed to be as user-friendly as possible for someone reading it in the 19th century. And this is a perfect example. On one side, you've got these incredible, dramatic, full-page engravings. And on the other, a biblical cyclopedia. I mean, it's literally a built-in encyclopedia to explain different terms and places. All of this extra content was added over the centuries to help people understand the main text. But, and this is key, it's not part of the original manuscript. Okay, now it's time to hop in our time machine. We're leaving the 19th century behind and jumping back more than 1,500 years, all the way to the 4th century. We're about to meet one of this Bible's oldest and most important ancestors. Everybody, meet the Codex Sinaiticus. Now, the name might sound a little academic, but what this thing represents is just mind-blowing. This is one of the world's greatest literary treasures. It's a massive, handwritten book that contains the oldest, complete copy of the New Testament, and it was made around the year 350. That little symbol next to it, the Aleph, that's its scholarly signature. And the story of how it even survived is straight out of an adventure movie. For centuries, it just sat there, perfectly preserved in a remote monastery at Mount Sinai. Then, in 1844, this German scholar named Konstantin von Tischendorf stumbles upon it and realizes its incredible age and importance. He's the one who brought this ancient voice back into the modern world. So now we have our two books, the Family Bible from the 1870s and the Codex Sinaiticus from way back in the 350s. Let's put them side by side because the differences are, well, they're staggering. The contrast here is just wild. On one hand, the Family Bible is printed on paper, it's in English, and it's absolutely loaded with study aids. But the Codex? It's handwritten by scribes on prepared animal skin, parchment. The language is Greek, and it's just the text. No commentary, no pictures, and, famously, no spaces between the words. Can you imagine reading that? This was a working document for a community of monks, not some decorative book for a family's coffee table. So why does this ancient book matter so much? Because for scholars and translators, the absolute #1 goal is to get as close as they possibly can to the original wording of the biblical texts. And to do that, you need the oldest and most reliable witnesses you can find. And the Codex Sinaiticus, well, it's an A-list witness. It's one of the best we've got. And this brings us to the really crucial part. By comparing ancient manuscripts like the Codex Sinaiticus with copies that were made centuries later, scholars can actually spot changes that crept into the text over all those years of being copied by hand. And here's the fundamental challenge, the big problem, really. We don't have the original documents written by Matthew or Paul. Not a single one survived. All we have are copies of copies of copies. The scholars who do this work, they're called textual critics, and they're basically like detectives, piecing together clues from thousands of manuscripts to figure out what the original probably said. Let's look at a super famous example from the Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew. Jesus is quoted here, and I'm reading a direct translation from the Greek of the Codex Sinaiticus. Everyone being angry with his brother will be liable for judgment. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, it's about to get complicated. Okay, so here's where all that detective work pays off. The Codex Sinaiticus, which is part of an early group of manuscripts from Egypt, just says if you're angry with your brother, you're in trouble. Simple as that. But in the later Byzantine tradition, which makes up most of the medieval manuscripts, a little phrase was added. The verse now says, angry with his brother without cause. That tiny two-word addition completely changes the meaning, doesn't it? It basically creates a loophole for what you might call justified anger. So the takeaway is this. Scholars look at this evidence and they often conclude that the shorter reading in Sinaiticus is probably the original one, and those words, without cause, were likely added by a later scribe, maybe to soften the teaching a little bit. This is just one of thousands of these tiny decisions that shape the Bibles that we read today. All right, let's zoom out and just recap this incredible journey. How do we get from a handwritten Greek codex sitting in a monastery to a printed English Bible sitting on a bookshelf? Well, it's a process that unfolds over centuries, and it kind of looks like this. First, you've got scribes, making handwritten copies for ages. Then, over time, as these copies are made in different parts of the world, you get these distinct textual families that pop up, like the Alexandrian and Byzantine ones we just talked about. Much, much later, scholars take on the huge job of comparing all these manuscripts to create a critical Greek text. That becomes the master copy, if you will, for translation into languages like English. And finally, the printing press lets these translations be mass-produced, and they eventually evolve into those very study Bibles we saw at the beginning. The journey from the Codex Sinaiticus to the family Bible is an amazing story of preservation and translation. It's really a testament to the human effort to carry important words across huge stretches of time. And, it leaves us with a pretty fascinating question for our own time. In our age of digital text and data that can just disappear, how are we going to make sure our most important stories survive for the next 1,500 years?